and I also acknowledge that we're on the lands of the Noongar people. And can I just make a comment on that? I was at a very important public meeting in Sydney a few weeks ago where those who are advocating the yes vote had a big public meeting. Linda Burney was there, Tanya Plibersek was in Sydney, and quite a number of significant Indigenous figures, including Tom Calma. And the debate came up about relationship between the Indigenous people and various governments and parliaments. And I was very proud sitting there, and Tom said, well, you should go to Western Australia and have a look at the agreement with the Noongar people, which is an incredible agreement. And all credit to Colin Barnett, who carried it through. We've, of course, done a lot of work on it as well before we lost our government. But it makes you proud when you hear someone say something like Tom Calma, a person of great distinction, that over here in Western Australia, despite a lot of prejudiced views people have about us sandgropers, we really did lead the way in terms of those sorts of agreements, which are very close to what you might understand to be a treaty. Could I also acknowledge my former parliamentary colleagues and existing parliamentary colleagues that are here this afternoon? I was a bit worried, actually, when I heard it was going to be the day of the Derby, but fortunately, because of television, that's on later. So thank you all for coming, and I hope the comments I make will be interesting to you and hopefully stir up a little bit of action as well. You may be aware, and I'm sure you are, that last night was a very significant night for the Labor side of politics. It was quite incredible. And there's various explanations of this. One of them, I think, is that we're getting good service out of our national government. They're sensible people. They're willing to argue a case, even if you disagree with it. They're focused on doing things that matter for the community. And the other side are just playing, the Liberals will not engage on these important issues that the nation faces. So I think that's part of that success, I think, that we saw on the weekend. But what a management task exists for our national government. I mean, you look at the issues that they have to bring together and make it all work. They've got the Yes campaign, of course, which is going to warm up and leads to a referendum later this year. We've got all of the issues related to international security and the debates and arguments about how best to defend our country. You've got arguments all about climate, which are really hard issues to deal with. They've been probably the big ones, but underneath that, productivity and economic growth still there as an issue. And of course, something I'm going to talk about later today, inequality and the effect it's having on our society, which I think needs to be given strong priority. But in all of my thinking about politics, I thank Alana for her comments, because she certainly, I think, said something that resonated with me about my own objectives. The system does matter. You know, there's a lot of cynicism about politics, and you know, you've got to break through that cynicism. Good government really matters. It really does matter, and it will produce results that we hope will produce overall well-being for the community. Even if it's just a minor increase, it's an increase in well-being, and well-being defined in the way in which we define it now, a very broad concept related to the freedoms of people, the equality that they have, the communities they live in, the environment they share. All of those things add up. So it's crucially important to have a good system. And so, in a way, when I've retired from politics, well, you're not subject so much to the day-to-day, which, let's face it, really can totally take over every aspect of your approach to politics, and that's a problem. You have to have space in there for a bit of thinking. You've got to have a bit of space in there for new policy. And one of the approaches that I found very useful as a member of Parliament is to explore what's happening around the world. Policy ideas are coming up everywhere. And amongst all of those policy ideas, occasionally there'll be one, that's exactly what we need to do in relation to this problem that came up. So the MPs here, look around at all of the policies. Now, the great philosopher, managerial professor, Peter Drucker, if any of you have heard of Peter, wonderful writer, he had a view that I find fascinating. He said that when we talk about predicting the future, you can't predict the future. He said the future's here. It's already here. And you know what he used to do? He was absolutely interested in all of those competitions that occur around the world about innovation. In WA, we have the Premier's Awards for public service innovation. There are awards given by different industry groups or whatever. And Truckee used to go around and find out who are winning these awards, because it told him that's the future. The future is not something that's you can define, but you can look at where it's coming from and then build on that. And again, I suppose if you can mix in with a process that's starting to occur and develop ideas about it, the consequences that are there for you to bring about significant change are there. But you've got to research these things. You've got to get out there looking at what's happening, reading the literature, finding out where the good policies are popping up. And, I'm a very strong believer when we were in opposition that policy is a weapon. And a lot of people say, forget the policy, we've just got to deal with the polls and what they say. That's all very well. But that means you sacrifice a whole weapon that you could use in the political debate. So they've got an enormous management task, our government, and we wish them well of the national government, because the issues are big. There's no doubt these are big issues, and we need good policy to come out of them. But back to my theme. We need a good system. And I've taken my time since retiring to look at a lot of the systemic issues. I'm very pleased that Alana's upper house is now elected on the basis of one vote, one value. Just think of those poor old pastoralists rolling in their graves when they know that Western Australia is no longer giving them the power that they should have. One of them, incidentally, I haven't found this only recently, George Gallop Miles was one of my uncles. And if you go up to Wiluna, there's a Gallop Hall. I thought, gee, that could be after me up in Wiluna. This was from some distant relative who was an early settler up there in the north of the state and went into a big part of the legislative council. On the election side of it, I think we've got the one vote, one value now, which is a very important initiative. There's still issues, I think, that need to be addressed about the role of money in politics. Not an easy one, but I think we still haven't cracked that nut properly. There's issues related to lobbying and how it occurs in government, so that the people can feel and know that it's their government we're talking about. It's not controlled by some small interest group in our society with a lot of money that can influence you on that basis. The other side, of course, that I'm interested in is there's the representative government election side. Then there's the agencies of accountability. Crucially important. The Auditor General, the Corruption Commission, Freedom of Information Commissioner, Privacy Commissioners. All of these roles are very important. And at the top of it all, of course, I suppose you'd put the judiciary with our separations of power doctrine. Now, what they have to do is to hold the government to governments to account and parliaments to account in terms of certain principles, so that we not only have majority government, which we get through the election process, but we have good government. And so you can see in the Australian system that huge gap that existed with a corruption commission. They resisted, and finally, as always, it's a Labor government that comes in and delivers on the reform. So what do we need to do to keep our system and to keep its integrity? As I said, there's some issues with elections we need to deal with. When it comes to the issue of the agencies of accountability that are very, very important, there are things we can do. My last speech at the Fabians, and this is without doubt, the Victorians are pretty good with their Fabian society, but Western Australia, Phil and Co, you're doing a magnificent job, keeping the Fabian flame flying, one step at a time, the Fabians bring about change. I remember when I was running for Parliament, I was from Geraldton, and, there was someone up around Northampton somewhere who I think was probably League of Rights or something like that, who read somewhere that I was a Fabian. And, this was a terrible thing. that this man is a socialist and he's taking us forward to this dark place, because I've been a member of the Fabian Society. But at that talk that I gave when I came last time, I talked about citizens' assemblies, where we randomly select people, as we do with the jury, to assist in the policy process. I really do believe that our legislative committees in our parliaments could use those processes a lot more than they do. I'm very excited about what they've done in Ireland in respect of it's now a major policy initiative that they pull out when they feel it's necessary. But the Prime Minister's office has a unit dealing with it, and a lot of consultation through the parliamentary committee systems is not good. It's formalised. You get the submission, but you know what the person's going to say anyway, and you're not getting a judgment call from ordinary people. That's what the Citizens Assembly gives you, a judgment call. In the state of Oregon, in the United States of America, they have a lot of citizens-initiated referendum. You probably know that great tradition that came out of populism in late 19th, early 20th century American history. The populism that led to the citizens-initiated referendum, or they have referendums as we do when you want to change the constitution. They introduced a practice I thought was very clever. You have a referendum, you get the yes case and you get the no case. As you know, we've had a debate about that in relation to the referendum here in Australia. And they said, well, we'll have the yes case, but every citizen will also get what the citizens' jury says. And so you'll get three bits of information. You get the one from the people who say we should pass this referendum, one from those who say you shouldn't, and then what ordinary people, randomly selected to do the task, tell you in their judgment, this is what we do. Now, these are important things that we should have on the table for consideration. Trust in government, I think in Australia, is in a much better place than it is in certain other jurisdictions. I think you know the main one I'm referring to here. Mr. Trump and the US of A, etc. So, it's crucially important we break down this distrust. Now, you don't break down the distrust by saying, look, we're better than that lot, we'll get in and we'll get rid of all these problems. You've got to do things. You've got to do things. And when you do things, the electors out there, particularly, in Australia, electors, they do follow these things. They're saying, oh, well, this government's actually trying to involve people better. This government is actually taking my ideas as an ordinary citizen more seriously because they're creating an assembly that can be in a position to offer advice. So I talked about that last time, so I won't talk about that today. But look, I want to put on the table for discussion, and the Fabians, of course, being a great body to do that, a Charter of Human Rights. Now, under the Alan Carpenter's government, there was a major review done, chaired by Fred Chaney, who was a former federal member. And now that we're in the city here at the moment, I just went past the Anglican Church. Peter Carnley, I think, was on that review as well. They recommended to have a Charter of Human Rights. You may know that Victoria has one, the ACT has one, and Queensland has now joined in, and they have one as well. But it didn't. If I can use an expression, it didn't crack a Guernsey here in Western Australia. But there was a strong advocacy for it. And recently, I had the privilege of addressing all of the human rights commissioners around Australia, the federal one, all the state ones, including the Western Australian Equal Opportunity Commissioner. And the human rights have put out a major paper saying, look, why don't we bring a lot of these things together and have a proper national framework that will establish rights and a process for dealing with attempts to undermine those rights. And it's a good paper, and I think it backs up what the Chaney inquiry said in Western Australia. It backs up what the Victorians and the ACT and the Queensland people have been doing in relation to this. And it's, I think, something that we could very well do that adds value. Now, I'm just going to read a list of the rights that they suggest that we put in such a charter. But I just want to say, very important that we understand what these charters do. The beneficiaries of charters of human rights are ordinary people, disabled people, single parents, people who have mental illness, people who are marginalised, because they have rights. And all too often, because they're a minority, they don't have great power over the system in terms of, if you don't do this, I'll marshal 1 million voters to come out, as some people can do, and they miss out a lot. But a major study that was recently conducted of 101 cases from Queensland, ACT and Victoria showed it was the ordinary people that were gaining from this, because they had a weapon that they could use to take up their cases within the system. So it's very important that we understand what these charters can do. Now, my final point I want to make today is in relation to those chambers is human rights, very important concept. We say underpins our society, and in many ways does, but I think we can underpin it much better. Equality. Remember the French Revolution, 1792. Liberty, equality, fraternity. And it was brilliant. A brilliant motto for the French Revolution. Unfortunately, they got a little bit power hungry, and as we know, the terror came in, and a lot of the good things that came out of that revolution weren't all lost, but quite a few were. Liberty, freedom, unless what you do infringes upon the rights and liberties and health and of others. Equality for all, and in what they interpreted at that time was that it meant equal capacity to enter into senior positions, rather than have an aristocracy or a monarchy or whatever in their system. So it was limited to that. And fraternity, interestingly, was the idea that establishing liberty and equality in monarchical Europe, as they did, will be under attack. And it was. I mean, the British went to war against the French pretty quickly. A lot of the monarchies all ganged up, against the French, because they feared that they would lose their own position in the monarchical system. And so it became very, very important that the revolution hold its ground. And fraternity was the doctrine, that we'll all stick together, boys, girls, to make sure that we achieve our reforms. Now, the equality one, underdeveloped really in that motto, but we don't talk about it enough. Now, I've just completed some work on education. Incidentally, it's fascinating that, I did this report for the Teachers Federation of New South Wales. Carmen Lawrence, my former leader, back, she's doing one for the Teachers Federation of Western Australia. So it'll be interesting to see how the two compare. I think Carmen will do a great job. She's very strong on all of those issues with education. But in the course of doing that, it's shocking what's happened in our society in terms of the development of inequality of educational outcomes. And it's getting worse. I can't imagine that the people after the war that set up our public system, and over time how other systems came in, how the great profound belief in education as a means to get equality in society. Choice now is the word rather than equality. And of course, we're not against choice, but is that everything? No, it isn't. There has to be other issues that come in if we're to get equality of education. So you've got whole cohorts of people in our community who are not really working at the level that we need to participate in modern society. And why is it that, in one section of society, there's very, very little achievement at the top, whereas in others there's a lot of achievement? Well, it's social economic disadvantage and all of the issues associated with that. Now, where does the Charter of Rights come into this? I think we've got in our society a good process called Closing the Gap that deals with Indigenous Australians, and education is one of the issues that they deal with. And the idea is, over time, through policy initiative, we will reduce the gap between the performance and achievements of Aboriginal people in all of the ways you define these things, as opposed to other parts of society. And we can imagine that same process for inequality generally. there's a gap. It's a gap that's undermining, I think, our society, because we're going back to having a class society in which you're either in one class and you run the show, you're in another class and you just, give you a half and half, give you a half-baked education. As long as you can hang in there, that's about it. But that's undermines the very idea of education as a powerful force to have more competition for the top positions. That's one aspect. That's one reason why some people don't like it. That's why men have been complaining about feminism, of course, because, less positions for the blokes, that's the way it works. And you get more competition at the top. Secondly, I think you get a better society. The diversity brings different ideas to the table. There's no, when you sit in a cabinet, we've had a few, Kay Hallahan here was in the cabinet. You really learn a lot about yourself, about what you're prejudiced. You might even think you've got a prejudice. And then all of a sudden you get confronted with it, but you have to be confronted with it. That's why, the inclusion of women into politics, people of different backgrounds, is so important, because, you learn about prejudice you may not even think that you've got. And so I think we really do need to take seriously our inequalities. Rather than say justify equality, we should say justify inequality. And when you look at it, they're not justifiable. It's just a pure case of someone having more power and protecting that power over others. Well, in the proposed Charter of Rights that we have put out by the Human Rights Commission, similar, but not the same as the one put out by the Fred Chaney, Peter Cartley inquiry here in Western Australia, or the same as the Frank Brennan one that we had in Commonwealth Government when Kevin Rudd came into power. Different, but there's a couple here that I find quite interesting. A right to education, a right in a charter to health and education, a right to an adequate standard of living, a right to a healthy environment. There's all sorts of others, but I'll focus on the health, education, living standard one. Now, it's not the same as saying I've got a right to freedom of expression. It's different. It's something that you've got to work on. And the South Africans, when they overthrew apartheid and came into they've got a very strong constitution in South Africa. They developed the idea of progressive improvement. So what you want from the right of education is to incorporate into government a notion of where they're progressively improving, so that there's more equality. Where it ends, that's a matter for, I think, the political debate. But at the moment, it's going the other way. So we're getting more inequality all of the time in relation to education and health. So I think a Charter of Rights perform those two very important functions. I mean, one would be all of the civil and political rights that we have, the right to vote. We tried to argue in the courts when we were in opposition that the right to vote meant one vote, one value. But our good friends, except Michael Kirby, he supported us on the High Court. The others said, no, it doesn't mean that. And then we didn't win it. But then we got it through at the end because we took the political route and eventually won over. So the right to vote is there, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, all of those things. Can you believe Australia voted against freedom of religion in 1998? So that was an attempt to expand its role in our system. As a result, I think largely of the campaigning of Cardinal Pell. That was how did you vote against it? But anyway, they did. They thought it was a terrible thing. So we can do all that. Then on top of that, we can look at the inequalities in our society and start to edge away at these things. And the image I want to give you is this. When we deal with improvement, step by step, the Fabians, step by step, send a message out to people that you're serious about your political system. I mean, we say here that we have a right to peaceful assembly, freedom of expression, taking part in public life. It's very important, very important. So we've got to send a message out that our democracy is here. We're going to protect it, we're going to promote it, and we'll do things to make it better. The public will pick that up, then say, Yes, we've got a right to education, we've got a right to health, right to living standards. We're going to start moving the system in that direction, send the message out to people. And obviously it's a Labor message that I'm talking about. And I think that's the whole basis of having the Labor Party, that it will do those sorts of things. But so far, so good. The distrust that exists between one half of America and their system and the other half is dramatic. And we live in hope that it won't turn the way it turned in 2016, I think it was. I hope we hope it doesn't go that way again, because it gets seriously dangerous if it does. We don't want that to happen. We don't want that to happen, and that means we've got to start thinking, what are the people, what will satisfy them that we're serious about democracy? Because as soon as you say you're not serious about it, they'll say, well, why should I be serious about it? You know, winner take all. Winner take all. And, you know, when you look at the extreme right in America, you know, Trump's very interested in this. Who are the winners for Trump? The winners for Trump are those who get power. And you know, remember his disgusting attack on McCain. Oh, remember that? Yeah. McCain, he's a loser. He's a loser. He got caught by the North Vietnamese and put in prison. He's a loser. His world is losers and winners. Now, how do you resolve that? Well, in a democratic system, you say, well, you have an election, and then you've got certain agencies of accountability, and you know, you work it through. There's only one way you can determine it under that theory, where it's all about power, is power through intimidation, through a threat, whatever. You just grab it. Or you be populist and you have charismatic, you're a charismatic person and whatever. That's fascism. That's what it is. I mean, that's what it is. The power is more important than everything else, as opposed to power backed up by principle. And so I think we've got a real, given that so much of what happens in America seems to drip down to our shores. Fortunately, I'm pretty impressed with the Australian people. Generally speaking, we think we'd have to say they're a pretty good lot, you know. They understand some of these things very, very clearly, and we're seeing it. But over around the world, there are these movements that are saying, you know, checks and balances. What's all that? That's rubbish. Israel's having a big debate about that at the moment. It's all rubbish, you know, we don't have to worry about that. The judiciary, those judges, you know, get rid of them. They're no good. Feminism, well, you know, that's hopeless. We all should be equal. No matter where you go to the starting block, we're all equal, aren't we? And so there's this undermining going on. And it's very, very important that Australia, I think, with its wonderful traditions that it's had of democracy, maintains the support for that. So to summarise, we've got some wonderful checks and balances. I think that some of the 3 states have shown us that we could do better on behalf of ordinary people, on behalf of the rights of ordinary people. And over time, I think we would send a message out as we improve our rights and freedoms, that people will acknowledge that and say that this is a good system to defend. And secondly, I think we need to get equality in much more, I think, obviously and centrally to what we do. We don't talk enough about equality. We don't talk enough about it, but it's starting to bite. It's starting to bite, and inequality, I should say, starting to bite, and we need to work on it. So look, thank you very much for the opportunity to come here today to the Fabians. There's a little challenge for you. A human rights, or a charter for Western Australia. I'm going to have a crack at Mark, the Premier, on that one. I don't know how I'll go on that. I'm too successful on some things, but that's the way it goes. Or I don't like the idea of being an ex-person who sending, you know, letters all the time and all this. But there's a few things that, you know, occasionally I think, well, I think he should know about that anyway, even if he doesn't agree with it. Because we can do better. And to all of those people that are involved in parliamentary politics here, make no mistake, you can do better. You can do things. It's a great system that we've created. My thesis, by the way, as an academic, was on the 1790s in the UK, when a reform movement really popped up, was squashed heavily by the government of the day. But they understood. They understood, these reformers, that you can't go on and on and on with the aristocracy. And some of them also said you can't go on and on with the monarchy. But there's a better way. So I'll leave you with that thought. There is a better way. Thank you for the work that you do in making sure it stays on the table for consideration. And let's start thinking about and talking about how we might get a human rights charter in Western Australia. Thank you very much.